The economic problems at the end of World War I weren't the only thing that seemed to suggest that the war ended badly. All the labor unrest contributed to a sense that a communist revolution was imminent. This was the beginning of what was termed a Red Scare, red being the color of the communist. And in this section, we'll look at this Red Scare. Certainly, a fear of radicalism ran deep in the United States, especially after the Industrial Revolution, when labor formed unions and there was violent strikes. But the creation of the Soviet Union, the first time in a real country workers had violently revolted and established a communist country, really scared a lot of Americans. In reality, the communist threat really wasn't that great in the United States. The Communist Party never had a whole lot of people, and indeed, even the socialists were beginning to weaken at this time. But for the people, fear seemed to be justified when a series of mail bombings took place in April 1919. 2 months later, bombs exploded in 8 cities, all within minutes of each other. In one instance, 2 died when a mail package was sent to a Georgia senator. A maid answered the doors and had her hands blown off. All of this seemed to scare people. One of the bombs blew up at the home of the Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. Palmer was an ambitious politician, and he had presidential ambitions. And he recognized that fear of terrorism, fear of radicalism, fear of Bolshevism could be a potent political weapon. And he decided to make it an issue. He fanned the flames of anti-communism. He said the tide of revolution was sweeping over every American institution of law and order. It was licking at the doors of the churches, leaping into the belfries of the school bell. He was saying that radicalism was seeking to replace marriage vows with libertine laws, burning up the foundations of society. He had really inflammatory rhetoric. When people are scared, they'll vote for protectors. And Mitchell Palmer was looking to advance his political career by couching himself as just such a protector. In November 1919, Palmer ordered a raid on a union, the Union of Russian Workers, in 12 cities. The Union of Russian Workers was a small ethnic union and unfortunately was associated with Russia, which didn't help them. But they weren't radical. Nevertheless, many of them were deported. In December 1919, 249 of them were deported on a boat that was named the Red Ark. Palmer then launched a series of raids, collectively known as the Palmer Raids, in January 1920. Now Palmer was claiming that there was a massive communist uprising planned, an imminent overthrow of the government planned, he said, for May Day in 1920. Which was, of course, the International Communist Workers' Holiday. With the support of the American Legion, a newly founded veterans organization, as well as the National Association of Manufacturers, an association of business owners who obviously didn't like labor unions, Palmer launched these raids and against a number of organizations that he considered radical. In the process, a lot of innocent people were hurt. 6,000 people were arrested, and there was no real evidence of a May Day uprising. There was no search warrants and no evidence of arsenals found. People were, dragged out in the middle of the night, and they're put in cold prisons in Boston. They were unheated. Marshals arrested one woman barging into a bedroom where she wasn't even dressed. It ended up deporting 550 people, with all the arrest and hoopla. And, there were just violations of civil liberties left and right, and there was no raid. When it became apparent that the revolution was not imminent, when the Palmer raids had not uncovered any great scheme, the Justice Department turned the whole investigation over to the Labor Department, and basically they stopped the witch hunt. Most of the cases that were pending where their people weren't deported were eventually dropped. Before the Red Scare was over, there were a number of spectacular cases of prosecution. In the famous Abrams versus United States trial of 1919, the defendants were convicted of distributing communist literature urging workers to disrupt U.S. efforts in the Russian Revolution. Remember, the Americans had sent troops. During the war, the Supreme Court had said the sedition and espionage acts were not violations of free speech if there was a clear and present danger, which was pretty obvious during the war. Now, however, in this period, the war was over with, and there was no declaration of war. So the question is, was it a clear and present danger? And the majority ruled that there was a clear and present danger, even though there was no declaration of war. It was imminent enough, the majority said. And thus, the Supreme Court upheld the curtailment of free speech. There are limits to free speech, but by saying that a clear and present danger can be something beyond just wartime, it really sort of opened Pandora's box. More famous was the case of two obscure Italian-born anarchists, Nicola Sacco and Bartholomew Vanzetti. The two were arrested in 1920 for the murder of a paymaster in South Braintree, Massachusetts. It took place right at the height of the Red Scare, just before the predicted May Day uprising that Palmer had predicted. The case attracted little attention initially in the United States, but in Europe the radical press played it up. They argued that Sacco and Vanzetti were being prosecuted not because of evidence of the crime, but simply because they were radicals. Mobs began to protest at American embassies. In Paris, a bomb exploded at the U.S. ambassador's residence. 20 people were killed in other bomb explosions. These radicals in Europe actually hurt the defense in the case, and because people were seeing them as interfering with American domestic justice. And in the end, both Sacco and Vanzetti were convicted, and they were electrocuted on August 23rd, 1927. The appeals took more than 7 years. In a sense, it sort of perpetuated the Red Scare a little bit longer. In reality, the evidence against them was questionable at best. Judge Webster Thayer allowed evidence of radicalism despite the legal relevance. No one successfully tied them to the crime, and both maintained their innocence until the end. And the cause became sort of a cause célèbre for civil liberties. I had mentioned Eugene Debs' union, the International Workers of the World, the IWW, a bit earlier. Much of the Red Scare was focused on this group. Many members of the International Workers of the World were jailed during the Palmer raids or fled the United States. In New York, the legislature refused to seat 6 duly elected socialists. Most of the leaders of the International Workers of the World were convicted of either the Sedition Act or Espionage Act. We've already mentioned the famous case of Eugene Debs, but there was also the case of Victor Berger. In 1918, Victor Berger was a socialist from Milwaukee, and he was eventually convicted under the Sedition Act and sent to prison for 20 years. He was paroled and actually won election to Congress twice in 1919 and again in 1920, but Congress refused to sit him. Eventually, in 1922, his conviction was overturned. This includes the section on how the Red Scare contributed to the poor ending to World War I.